Now, look, the Trump administration is slashing millions of dollars in DEI grants from a library and museum system. This is, of course, part of its overall DOGE push to try and get rid of government waste. But it's actually cutting $15 million from the Institute of Museum and Library in the form of grants. And one of them being, Josh, have a listen to this, a DEI grant of $265,000 going to Queen's College in New York to conduct a research project on why BIPOC teens read Japanese comic books. Well, thank goodness that we've established that. And aside from the progress DOGE is making, Josh, I mean, what does it say about the nonsense waste in government like this?
I mean, how do you not laugh at that, right? I mean, I see a headline like that, and I mean, my first thought, Danica, is, I mean, who thought this was a good idea? I mean, what kind of Mandarin deep in the bowels of the unaccountable deep state in Washington, D.C. actually came across this idea and was like, wow, we need to allocate U.S. taxpayer dollars to figure out whether BIPOC people, I mean, whatever that means, I mean, this is left-wing jargon, but whether BIPOC people like Japanese comic books there. I mean, why don't we go ahead and try and figure out why the children of American Indians prefer Crayola crayons to a different type of crayon there? I mean, you're literally just flushing money down the drain at this point. I mean, it's just so utterly stupid. This is why, to this day, Elon Musk's DOGE agenda, when you phrase it properly in the public polling to the voters, it remains very successful. Now, the left has done a very successful job of tarring and feathering Elon Musk and DOGE there. And unfortunately, Tesla stock has taken quite a plunge since Inauguration Day, and Elon Musk's personal favorability rating has gone down a little bit. But when you actually explain what DOGE is doing there, that they are cutting stupid freaking crap like this, pardon my bluntness there, but this is just stupid freaking crap. And when you are cutting stuff like this, when you are cutting DEI programs for Myanmar and gender ideology instruction for teachers in the Congo, I mean, most Americans wake up and they're like, I'm sorry, what do you say? I mean, like, where are my hard-earned taxpayer dollars going there? So I say keep this up. There's a lot of rumors coming out of DC right now that Elon Musk could be out of Washington sooner rather than later. I personally expected that. I mean, he's the wealthiest man in the world. He has other things to do with his time. He has to manage multiple companies there, but he has to see the DOGE operation through, whether it's him or his handpicked successor. This is very, very important, frankly, very long overdue work, and I look forward to seeing that work continue.
I completely agree, and I just think it's astonishing that for so many years, governments have been given these sorts of DEI grants out here, there and everywhere. So, you know, you can see why DOGE is needed in America right now. Now, meanwhile, Trump has had a DEI court win. The Supreme Court lifted an order that blocked the Trump administration from cutting millions of dollars in grants for teacher trainings as part of the president's efforts to terminate taxpayer-funded DEI initiatives. So, Josh, explain to us, what does this mean?
So it's a good ruling insofar as this allows the president to have some greater discretionary control over the funding decisions within his executive branch. I mean, frankly, Danica, if I'm being very honest with you, I think it's appalling that we're even having this conversation. I mean, as a matter of basic separation of powers, basic American constitutional law, it should be beyond obvious that the president of the United States has the ability to cut funding from within his own executive branch. There was only one person in America's system of governance who wields the executive power, and that's the president of the United States. It's not the vice president. It's not the attorney general. It's not any random deep state bureaucrat. It's not the dog catcher, the coffee boy, or anyone else. It is the president of the United States. He has the executive power. And as all sorts of legal scholarship on the topic has confirmed over the decades, frankly, over the centuries, the executive power entails the decision to control the decisions within your executive branch. So it's a very simple ruling. I find that a little disturbing as a lawyer myself, that this was not a 9-0 ruling. I believe it was 5-4, if I remember correctly. Unfortunately, everything these days is politicized, even when it comes to the U.S. Supreme Court. The court is going to have their hands full over the rest of this Trump presidency because the left is going to just keep on coming at them with all these NGOs and left-wing public interest, nonprofits. The litigation is going to keep on coming. The court's going to have to stand firm. I wish that I could confidently project to this audience and say that I think that they're going to do the right thing day in and day out there. Unfortunately, I've been burned too many times. I tend to be a little bit more realistic and sober when it comes to the Supreme Court, but they got it right this time, and that's good.
Yeah, the only winners out of this long litigation over the next few years are the lawyers, who will be absolutely raking in the money because of the constant left trying to take Trump to court. Now, look, Vice President J.D. Vance has suggested that he could indeed run for president in 2028 if he delivers as vice president. This is what he said.
the presidential election in 2028. When we get to that point, I'll talk to the president. We'll figure out what we want to do. But the way that I think about it is if we do a good job, the politics take care of themselves.
Josh, there's no doubt. Come on, he will run, don't you think?
Look, I think if the Trump presidency goes as expected, and look, I mean, the jury is currently out on the tariffs. The markets are clearly not reacting very well to it. We will see what happens in the midterm elections next fall. Personally, I think that the economy will more than rebound by then. This is quite a short-term disturbance, but there are a lot of people that are already panicking, saying the Republicans are getting set to lose the Congress next fall. I'm not one of those people. It's a long ways away. Americans have a very, very, very short memory. So to have this kind of chatter in April 2025, a year and a half before the election, strikes me as wildly premature. But all that's to say that if the Trump presidency is a generally successful presidency when it comes to the economy, when it comes to immigration, foreign affairs, all the various important issues there, and I like what I see certainly thus far, then yes, I mean, of course, J.D. Vance is going to run for 2028. I would be absolutely shocked if not. The only possible way that I could see that not happening is if Donald Trump somehow does try to argue some sort of interesting 22nd Amendment constitutional loophole in order to himself run for a third term. That's probably not going to happen, in part because it's kind of legally dubious, if I'm being honest with you. It's not a very strong argument there that it would pass constitutional muster. So assuming that his lawyers don't try to finagle that sort of outside the box thinking, then I think J.D. Vance will run, and frankly, he probably will be the favorite at that point as well.
Yeah, absolutely, no doubt. Now, look, in some absolutely fabulous news, I've got to say, Tim Walz apparently will not be running again. Have a listen.
Well, I'm certainly thinking about running again in Minnesota if that's what they want. I am not thinking about running in 2028.
Josh, what a great relief that is.
Yeah, I mean, talk about the least memorable vice presidential running mate ever. I mean, I guess right up there with Tim Kaine with Hillary Clinton in 2016. People forget that Tim Kaine even ran, frankly, for vice president. I mean, Tampon Tim Walz did not exactly make a smoking name for himself on the national stage. I mean, people to this day will remember Tim Walz still properly and rightfully as the man who set the George Floyd riots on a national conflagration. He could have contained that. He could have nipped that in the bud there. Instead, he and his left-wing spouse and all the left-wingers there in the government in Minneapolis and St. Paul, they let the fire spread. They were tacitly and in some ways not so tacitly encouraging the riots to spread. And ultimately, we saw billions and billions of dollars in property damage from left-wing vandals and arsonists and generally just anarchists there in this 2020 horrific summer. So Tim Walz's legacy is terrible. I'm sure that he's frankly not going to be successful if he runs again in Minnesota. I think the voters even there in that center-left state probably had too much of him there. Where the Democratic Party goes from here, I frankly have no idea. I'm just very happy it's not my problem, but I do feel pretty confident saying that Tim Walz is not the future. He's not the past either, by the way. He's not the past. He's not the present. He's definitely not the future.
No, I mean, he was completely invisible in the past. Let's be realistic. So Thank goodness he's established he won't run again. But look, part of that interview, and I found this particularly interesting, he was asked about Joe Biden's decline. And I thought that his answer was very telling. This is what he said.
Don't you think your party needs to acknowledge that President Biden was not up for the job of running for re-election and that this was a major mistake by the
He made
Democrats?
that decision.
I know, but you all went along with the idea that he was up for it, and he wasn't. And everybody saw it, and the country rejected it.
Yeah, well, look, history will tell us to go back on that. That very well could be the case, Jake. What I'm concerned about is learning from those lessons. I would hope we would never do it again, make a mistake.
Josh, learning from those lessons, history will look back on that. I personally took that as an admission. They did know all along that Joe Biden had declined. How do you read that?
I read it the exact same way you read it. So this is actually my first time seeing this interview with Jake Tapper. That's pretty astounding stuff, frankly, from Tim Walz there. That is really kind of jaw-dropping stuff that he would basically admit this on national television. It's not really admitting a whole lot because we basically all knew this. But for the guy who was actually, God forbid, who could have been the vice president of the United States to actually go ahead and say that to a very friendly left-of-center commentator, in this case, Jake Tapper, that's no small news. The Democratic Party likes to take the moral high ground. They think of themselves as being the morally superior statesmen, the morally superior elected officials, the morally superior human beings in general here in the United States there. But we have not scratched the surface of the who knew what and when did they know it scandal that is going to go on for a very, very long time when it comes to Joe Biden and his decline. But decline is actually a relative term, because if you go back and actually look at some of the reporting that's come up, the Wall Street Journal had a very deep dive a couple months ago, for instance, there. If you go back and actually look at the reporting, people say that it was obvious from within the first weeks, the first months of the Biden presidency, going back to the year 2021, that this guy did not have all of his wits about them there. Frankly, go back and look at the footage from even the 2020 Democratic primary, and you compare that to Joe Biden back from 2008 when he ultimately became Barack Obama's vice president. Something clearly happened between the years 2008 and 2020. So by the time that this last year came in 2024, I mean, he was just totally beyond out to lunch. And like I said, we have not even scratched the surface of this there. I expect there to be some sort of maybe even church committee style investigation here when it comes to the United States Senate using their subpoena power. I want to see we should not spare anything when it comes to trying to root out what the Biden family knew. When did they know it? Who was making these decisions there? Who was he actually signing the pardons? I mean, these are all very, very, very real questions, and I think the American people want answers. Frankly, they actually really deserve those answers too.
Well, I completely agree. And actually, speaking of, a former White House doctor is going to be grilled by House Republicans for hiding Joe Biden's decline. This could be a key moment. I think, Josh, this could be the key moment where we find out what that doctor knew and whether or not there was indeed a cover-up.
So I look forward to this very much. I mean, look, so medical records we're not going to be able to access, right? We're not going to be able to actually see the literal documents there. We're not going to be able to see the communication that the doctor had with the president, with quote unquote Dr. Jill Biden, because that's just shielded by America's somewhat Byzantine privacy laws, especially when it comes to medical records. But he can certainly speak about it there, and he can basically then put the ball back into Joe and Jill's court and say, no. But I mean, what about the chief of staff? I mean, what about like Jeff Zients? I mean, what about the Biden inner circle people there? I mean, I ultimately do want to hear from them. Get them under oath. I mean, get all these people under oath. The Republicans control the United States House and the United States Senate. That means they have the subpoena power. The subpoena power is pretty serious in this country there. You might be able to make some sort of executive privilege argument in order to finagle yourself out of getting a subpoena there, but easier said than done. And courts do not typically look very favorably there because the subpoena power is actually very broad. Frankly, multiple MAGA acolytes like Peter Navarro and my friend Steve Bannon just went to prison because of their quote unquote defiances of a congressional subpoena. So this is very serious stuff there, and I hope the Republicans in both the House and Senate actually use this power again to try and get to the bottom of this horrible scandal.
Yeah, look, I think get your popcorn ready. I really hope we finally get an answer to what went on and who knew what. Josh Hammer, nice to catch up with you. Thanks so much for joining us on the show this evening.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.